Hello and welcome. I think if I've got all my settings right, we're actually live right now. So this is quite an exciting event for me and my first live online event ever, certainly one that I've arranged. For those of you who are our members, you'll hopefully know that we've done this for you. We surveyed the membership very recently, it was last year sometime, and the one message that came through loud and clear was that you weren't seeing or hearing enough from me. So we've taken that on board big time, and my aim is to try and get at least 4 of these a year. So each quarter at least I do a live event. Because I travel so much, I don't think I can do it more often than that. So, but we're aiming for at least 4 a year. So I've chosen the topic for today. One of the main reasons for these live events too is so that you guys can ask questions. That is the whole point. I want to be able to help you guys with both the use of the resources or any questions that you have about the research. So I'll do a little bit of a presentation on a topic, and then at the end we'll do more of a Q&A session where you can ask questions. So you can ask questions if, again, I can figure out the technology. I have got my wonderful Kelly Boyd here beside me. She's the technological person, not me. So we should be able to, you should be able to ask questions, but you can also type them in, supposedly. You should be able to actually type in the questions, and then Kelly's here so she can see it all. Oh, great. We've got greetings from Arkansas, we've got greetings from Minnesota, greetings from London. This is so freaking cool, isn't it? Anyway, I'll get on with it. What I've chosen as a topic for today is I'm going to start talking about the subluxation. I think that's the one thing that I study a lot of. Obviously, I can't do it all in one go. We're going to probably try and keep these talks, these live events under 2 hours. I'm very conscious that you guys are over in London. It's very late for you. So anyone in Scandinavia too, it's also very late. So we'll try and keep these to a couple of hours each. So I'm going to start talking about the subluxation, but that will probably be my topic for about 4 events. What I'm specifically going to try and cover today is the neurophysiological effects, and that will be 1 out of about 4 because there's so much to cover. I did get a request before this live event if I could also cover the local changes that happen at the spine level. And I did look into including that today, but it's going to have to be its own topic because there's actually quite a lot of evidence just there as well. So for anyone that thinks that there's not a lot of evidence of the subluxation, well, then they should hopefully be listening in because there's so much evidence I can't even cover it in one go. So yay, it's working. So what I am going to talk a little bit about today is one of the models that we definitely don't have a lot of support for, and I'm going to explain why. That's the squash nerve theory. I'm going to explain why we don't have a lot of evidence for that or what the actual evidence is showing us. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the neuroplastic model, the neuroplasticity model, because that's what we kind of know definitely does happen. And then I'm going to summarize at the end that just because this neuroplastic effect is happening, it doesn't mean we know everything yet. There's a whole lot more that we still don't know and we still need to look into. Then I'm going to cover briefly how I talk about the subluxation if I'm talking to the public, just so that you get a taste for how I would do that. I'd kind of do the same sort of thing if I'm talking to other healthcare professionals as well. And it's all in line with the neuroplasticity model for now, because that's what we have evidence for. And then at the end, I'm just going to share just my own vision very briefly, what drives me, what I'm working towards. Then I'm going to specifically cover some of the membership benefits, because that's something, again, that came through in the online survey, on the membership survey that we did, that some people still don't really know how to use the membership to its max. And then we'll finish off with Q&A. So I'm going to dive right into it. By the way, the handout for today is already uploaded. We have a closed group, a Haavik Research closed group on Facebook. So if you want the handouts from today, just go to that Haavik Research group. Ask to join if you're not already a member of the group. Kelly will sit here and monitor that on her phone because she can multitask because she's a woman, and she will tick you off so that you can download the talk handout right now. Also, if some of you are trying to become my Facebook friend, I will apologize up front. I'm not trying to ignore you. My private Facebook thing is full. I can't actually accept more friends, but I do have the public page. So if you want to follow me on the public page, You can follow everything that's going on there. And I also do post a lot in that Haavik research group, the closed group. It's another place where you can also ask me questions. We do try and monitor that quite regularly. If it's a little gap in me getting back to you, that's because I'm a distracted scientist person that doesn't necessarily always manage to focus on one thing at the same time. Anyway, let's moving right along. So, as I'm sure all of you are very well aware, there have been many, many different models for what the subluxation is over the years. Some of these are weird, and some of these actually have a little bit of backing for them. So I've picked out one that I wanted to talk to you a little bit closer about, and that's this MOPI model, the misalignment, the occlusion of an opening, the pressure on the nerve, and the interference with the mental impulse. And this started with BJ, if I've got my history correct, and feel free to correct me. But it was BJ that really started to talk about this bone out of place squashing the nerve. And I think, from my understanding again, is that he came up with this because it was a good way or a good theory or model to sell it to the public, to try and explain what was going on. So his original model was that it was a subluxation is a condition of a vertebra that has lost its proper juxtaposition with the one above or the one below or both to an extent less than a luxation, which occludes an opening, impinges nerves, and interferes with the transmission of mental impulse from the brain. Now, I had to learn that off by heart when I studied, and thank you, Phil. That was lots of fun. But do we have any evidence for this? So I've been looking at all the evidence I can find around this model, and there's some really interesting evidence that actually has been done. But I would say that there's not a lot of evidence for this model, and I'll explain why I say that. If to summarize the research on this MOPI model, the squash nerve theory of the subluxation, I'd say that for most people, unless they're experiencing radiating arm or leg pain, their subluxation probably does not have a squash nerve root component to it. So there's no interference of the action potentials traveling in and out of that intervertebral foramina. And I'd also say that for most people, again, unless they're experiencing radiating arm or leg pain, adjusting their subluxations is not taking pressure off that squash nerve root. So can we have, let's look at the evidence then. So can we have squash nerve roots or squash spinal cords? Absolutely, yes, we can. We know we can have things like a disc herniation. Absolutely. For most people, if they have a disc herniation, they are symptomatic if it's squashing their nerve roots. But can you be asymptomatic and still have a herniated disc? Yes, you can. But then the question is it really squashing their nerve root? That's a little bit questionable. And the reason why I say that is because of some of this animal research. By the way, if you can see down the bottom of the slide, you've got the references to the actual articles that I'm talking about on each slide. There's also a replay of this entire talk will be on the membership site. So you can just log into your realitycheck.com site as a member, and it will be available there. I'm going to put it under the Science Mastery section. Yeah, we are. So that's where you'll find the this whole talk again if you want to recheck anything. So anyway, there's some really, really cool studies that have looked at what happens when you squash nerve roots. And this particular study by Hubbard et al. In 2008, what they did is they exposed the C6-7 nerve root in anesthetized rats, and then they could check the difference. They put pressure on the nerve root, but varying pressures. So on some, they put lots of pressure, some they had less pressure, and they had the pressure there for 15 minutes, and then they measured what happened to these animals. What was really interesting is that the level of pressure, or the amount of pressure that it took for the animals to start acting as if they were in pain. So it's called mechanical hypersensitivity. If you start touching their paws, then they start with this withdrawal reflex that they're in actual pain from the touch, which obviously shouldn't happen. So it's like a full-blown nerve root pain issue. The pressure it took to reach symptoms was basically 26.3 millinewtons. But it took more pressure than that before you got a disruption in the action potential flow. So you had to get up to 31.6 millinewtons before there was any interference with nerve root transmission. So that's really, really interesting because it tells us that it takes less pressure to give you symptoms than it takes before it starts to disrupt the flow of information through that nerve root. So it's kind of a key point there. This has also been followed up by Howie et al. In both rabbits and in cats, again, anesthetized. And they were also specifically looking at putting pressure again on the nerve roots. And what they found in their study is that you actually had to put the pressure on the dorsal root ganglia to get long-term effects. So to get but the interesting thing is, you've got to follow what was that long-term effect, because that long-term effect was a change in afferent information back up to the brain, not interference of the nerve root transmission. So obviously the pressure it took to get these long-term effects or after effects from putting pressure on a squashed nerve root, it had to involve the dorsal root ganglia. And this pressure was obviously not enough to cause that disruption to the actual nerve root flow. It was only really enough to cause that mechanical hypersensitivity. So if you've forgotten what the dorsal root ganglia is, I'll just remind you. I'll see if I don't know if you can see the cursor. I'm hoping you can see the cursor. But in that case, you can see the little round bulges of the dorsal root ganglia just in that IVF, the nerve. And what that is it's the cell bodies of the sensory afferents. So the nerve on your left is a normal motor neuron, and that's probably how most of you think of a neuron, where you've actually got the cell body with the dendrites around it and then one long axon. But you've got to remember that a lot of your sensory nerves coming from the periphery and going in up to the brain, they are this unipolar or pseudo-unipolar neurons where the dendrites are down one end and then there's one long axon, and halfway up the axon is the cell body. And that cell body with the dendrites around it and then one long dorsal root ganglia. So when in this study, what they really showed was that if you put pressure on those cell bodies, the dorsal root ganglia cell bodies, you could have this long-term effect from that pressure. But that long-term effect was afferent information going back up to the brain and causing the hypersensitivity type, the nerve root symptoms, basically. So again, very interesting. Another really cool study that's been done by Song et al. In 2003, and they instead of exposing the nerve root like these guys in these other studies, Howie and Hubbard, they actually surgically opened up the animals and then put the pressure on the nerve root. What these guys did, Song et al., they actually inserted these little steel rods. I hope you can see my little animation. It took me a little while to figure that one out. I'm going to show you that one again. They inserted these little steel rods into the IVF of rat spines again. So obviously that's not L5. Should be a little bit lower down, but I was too late to change that. But anyway, so they didn't really sort of expose it, but they just inserted a little steel rod to see what a little bit of pressure would do in these, if you inserted these little steel rods into the IVFs of these rats. What changed in these rats was, again, only the sensory afferent feedback. So there was no changes, again, in that action potential firing rates. The information going in and out of that nerve root was not changed. What is changing is the afferent information from that area around the spinal cord is blasting back up to the brain. And these animals were, again, showing evidence of that mechanical hypersensitivity. So you could touch their paws and they'd have this withdrawal reflex as if they're in pain. So again, what I'm taking from this is that if you do squash nerve roots, you can squash nerve roots, but what happens first is this afferent information going back up to the brain, which really is the neuroplasticity model, not the squashed nerve root model. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of a key point to take from this. I've done a little summary slide for you. So if you look at the evidence when it comes to the MOPI model, the bone out of place squashing a nerve, what is it we can say? Well, we cannot rule out that you can have a squashed nerve root component for some subluxations for some people. But if they have got this squashed nerve, chances are, if it's interfering with their nerve roots, chances are they're in radiating pain first. So someone coming into your office, they ain't going to have a squashed nerve root component unless they're in radiating arm or leg pain. Are you with me on that? That's kind of what this evidence is showing us, that the pressure needed to interfere with the nerve root transmission in and out of that IVF is more than the pressure needed to cause radiating arm or leg pain. So there could be a squashed nerve root component, but chances are if someone's coming into you and there is a squashed nerve root component to their subluxation, they will be in radiating pain. We also know that there's not a single study yet that's shown that squashing the nerve root actually impacts physiology in any way. Even if one nerve root's interfered with, the body still gets innervation from other areas. So there's no studies long-term showing that having one squashed nerve root is actually interfering with organ function in any way, shape, or form. I can't find any evidence of that. I can't find a single study that shows that having a squashed nerve root interferes with organ function in any way. So, and there's absolutely no evidence that I can find yet that adjusting subluxation relieves pressure off a squashed nerve or changes axoplasmic flow or the action potential flow or anything like that. So that's kind of where we are at with the squashed nerve root theory. It doesn't explain the effects that you would have from most adjustments that you would adjust all day, every day. So what theories or models of the subluxation do we have research evidence for? Well, we have a heap of evidence for a neuroplastic model. Even some of these animal research studies are really showing a neuroplastic effect. So even if you are squashing the nerve root, it's changing the afferent information going back up to the brain, which will be changing then the way the brain perceives what's going on in the body and the world around it. So it's, even the squashed nerve root model evidence actually supports the neuroplasticity model. So I would argue that for most people who are subluxated, the subluxation represents a central segmental motor control problem, which is causing maladaptive central neural changes. So it's a cycle, it's a negative cycle. If the central nervous system isn't controlling the movement pattern of the spinal motion segment appropriately, it's not moving appropriately, it's not stretching the muscles appropriately. So this is causing a change in the afferent information back up to the brain, which causes these maladaptive plastic changes, which makes it harder for the brain to perceive accurately what's going on in the body and the world around it. Now, why I say that, I'll go into in a little while as well. But I'd also argue that for most people, when you adjust subluxations, when you're adjusting the spine, you will be improving the accuracy of the communication between the brain and that spinal segment, if it was in the neck, and the environment, so that you have a positive neuroplastic effect. So that the brain becomes more accurately aware of what's going on, not only in the spine, but also the rest of the body and the environment around you. And again, I'll come back to why I say that in a moment. So if you look at, do we have any evidence to back this up, that, a subluxation causes that abnormal spinal information going to the spine and central nervous system because of the changes in movement pattern or the stretching of the little paraspinal muscles, and that causes aberrant processing and integration at the level of the brain and central nervous system? When I say brain, I'm really meaning central nervous system. It's just easier to talk about the brain, and I find it easier to talk about the brain, especially when I'm talking to the public as well. Instead of talking about central nervous system, I just talk about the brain. But I'm really meaning the whole central nervous system, meaning the brain stem, and the spinal cord. Anyway, if you have this abnormal input coming up to the brain, it integrates information differently, not just from the spine, interestingly enough, but from the rest of the body, which then can cause poor control. So it is a circle. I think it's really, really key that this is a ongoing self-perpetuating problem. And when we come in then and adjust the subluxated segments or adjust the spine, we have more appropriate joint movement. We have increased range of motion intersegmentally, and we know we do. Therefore, we get more appropriate spinal information being sent up to the brain and central nervous system, therefore more appropriate processing and integration of not just spinal information, but also other multimodal sensory information, and so that you're more aware of what's going on in your environment and in your body, and therefore you have better control of the spine and the body. So do we have any evidence for this? Yes, we have tons of evidence for this. And that's what's really, really cool. I can't go for absolutely everything in today. Again, we don't have enough time for that, but I'll keep doing, multiple events like this, and we'll go through, say, all the sensory changes, and we'll go through all the motor changes, and then we'll go through all the sensory motor integrative changes and the multimodal changes. And then we'll go through all the, the local effects of the spine, and we'll just keep doing little bits on each of these live events. So I want to step back a little bit now and just take a few minutes just to think about what is the spine's function, especially when you're talking to the public. It's very important that they understand what is the role of the spine. And if you notice again, the guy running, I'll just show you that one again. Have a look at the spine when he's running. You can actually see the movement in the spinal segments. So as he runs, the spinal bones move in a nice synchronized manner. But when the guy here is lifting, you can see that the spine is very stiff. Because he's lifting a heavy weight, the spine stiffens up. And they are the two key things that your spine is supposed to do. Sometimes move and sometimes stiffen up. So the key point here that you've got to remember is spinal bones don't move themselves. So for your spine to move or stiffen up, to find the balance that you need between movement and stiffness, the brain has to tell the spine what to do. But how does the brain know how to do that? Well, it knows how to do that because it needs to first sense what's going on. So remember, when you think about a spine, there's actually multiple layers of muscles. I'll just do that one again. Have a look. You've got those tiny little intersegmental muscles that go across one vertebra at a time, and then you've got multiple layers of longer and longer attachment sites, a better biomechanical set up to be able to produce movements and force. So the brain senses what is going on from these deep little muscles. That's how the brain knows where the spine is. And then it can tell the bigger muscles how to move the spine appropriately or stiffen it up appropriately. But it's even more complicated than that. And this is when it gets really quite cool. Not only do you have those multiple layers of muscles, but what also is attached to the spine is the diaphragm and the pelvic floor muscles. So as the brain is sensing what's going on in the spine and trying to control spinal movement, it also needs to coordinate your breathing, which is happening all the time, right? And your continence, your pelvic floor function. So it's coordinating your breathing and your continence while it's also sensing what's going on in the spine and controlling those multiple layers of muscles. On top of this, the spinal muscles, the little muscles, are intimately connected with your eyeball muscles. And that's how you can still read the slide, even try this wherever you are. Try moving your head to the side and you can still read the slide, right? I can even still read it when I'm going backwards and forwards. The only reason I can do that, don't know how to get rid of that Facebook thingy. Oops, should have maybe turned that off. Thank you. I really can't get rid of it. Oh, it's gone. Oh, I did something. Oh, shit. I'm back. Sorry, guys. This is the first time I'm doing this. Anyway, so the only reason that your spine is so intimately connected with your eyeball muscles is to keep your eyes level. And that's the way we're literally designed, so that you can always see your environment. You're designed that way to sort of help protect you, to always be able to see your environment. And on top of that, I think I now need to go back over here and click on that side. Yeah. On top of all those layers of muscles and coordinating with your diaphragm and your pelvic floor muscles and your eyeball muscles, there's also multiple layers of other tissues. So you've got, your skin, there's fat, there's fascia, there's ligaments, there's tendons, there's afferent information from all of these layers as well. Like something like your fascia, we used to think it was just like glad wrap around the muscles. Well, it turns out fascia is actually a really intelligent tissue. They have whole sections on it in neuroscience conferences, which are absolutely fascinating. So it's a very, very complex system. So how does the brain control all of this? It even has different strategies that it can use. So these strategies to control that spinal function again can be a reactive type of strategy. So it can go like, oh my God, this thing just happened. I need to react to that. It can be that kind of scenario. But you can also have anticipatory strategies. So the brain can anticipate what it expects will happen. Like, for example, when you lift an arm up, the brain actually turns on your core abdominal muscles before it sends any messages to the shoulder muscle. And it does that to literally protect your spine so that you don't mini whiplash your lower back every time you lift your arm up. So and they're called feed-forward anticipatory strategies. And then, of course, there's also a tonic set of information that's always being sent to your muscles, and that's that background muscle tone that you have at any one point in time. And it can change the level of tonic input. It can change in a reactive way, in a feed-forward anticipatory way, and all of these things are going on all at one time. So it's a really complicated system, and no wonder, we still, as neuroscientists, we still do not understand fully how the brain controls spinal function, to get that balance between movement and stiffness, we still don't even know how that happens in a normal healthy spine, let alone what goes wrong in a subluxated state or in a dysfunctional state. Do you get my point? Like, I think we need to stop beating ourselves up for not fully understanding what a subluxation really is yet, because it's a very complicated system. So another thing that's quite clear when you look at spinal function, it's not black and white. You don't have perfect spinal function and full-blown pathology. It's not black and white. It's more like 50 Shades of Grey, and it's, a bit like that sexy book, but not quite. So you can have 50 Shades of Grey between, probably even more, between a fully healthy functioning spine when it's moving when it should, it's stiffening up when it should, it's got this perfect feed-forward anticipatory things, it's reacting beautifully, it's got that great tonic background, it's coordinating with the breathing, it's coordinating with the continence, it's coordinating properly with your eyeballs, everything's working beautifully together. That is your fully healthy spine. But there's 50 shades before you get to full pathology. So somewhere along that line, you get to that green line, and this is where symptoms start to occur. So there's things that can dysfunction before you get symptoms. And I'm going to show you some examples of this. This has been shown in research studies. There's heaps more that's dysfunction by the time you cross that red line and you're now into frank pathology. So when I'm talking about in that pathology way, not just chronic pain, but chronic pain is one of them. But, this is where you've got disc herniations, where you've got arthropathies, where you've got spinal cancers, all that kind of actual spinal pathology is way down that right-hand side. But the interesting component here about this subclinical pain category, because a lot of the research that we've done, we've actually started out looking at people that were just developing symptoms. So they were not down right end. They were nowhere near that, full-blown pathology end, but they were up around this subclinical pain category end. And what's really interesting about this is we've ended up with a whole lot of studies where we've compared subclinical pain people with fully functioning healthy spines. And there's quite a lot that shows up there, and I'll get back to that because it's really, really interesting. What seems to be the case is when your body gets overloaded, you move down that, that scale to the darker, to the black, to the pathology. And please don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that a subluxation causes all of this. There are many things that causes the body to be overloaded. I actually think a subluxation is a symptom of the body being overloaded. But when the body is overloaded, one of the things that does happen is we get subluxated, and that causes a problem in the brain's awareness of what's going on. So it's part of the picture, but there's many, many things that overload the symptom, overload the body and cause this maladaptive drive. We don't fully understand it yet. Again, it's one of those things, why does one person end up in this maladaptive way where someone else does not? But we also know, but we definitely know it's possible that the body can, adapt in that maladaptive way where you end up with symptoms. But we also know it's possible for you to adapt in the positive way. And so I always bring up, so where do you think we can be subluxated along this continuum of the healthy spine right down to the pathology spine? And this isn't as interactive as it can be, at least not yet. But so I would argue that you can be subluxated anywhere along that grayscale, except for the complete healthy, right? If you're completely healthy, then you're moving when you should, you're stiffening up when you should, you're reacting perfectly when you should. So by definition, you're not subluxated, if you get what I mean. But I think you could be subluxated anywhere else along that scale. And what I think happens when we do adjust the spine is that we have a positive neural adaptive effect, so that we are pushing the system back into the positive effect. But it will depend on many factors. So although I'm saying that's what probably the model is, but that's not necessarily, that's not black and white. So if you actually look at, what causes, the maladaptive versus the adaptive phases, you kind of need to take a step even further back, because your health or your body's function will depend on two competing systems, because the body is always trying to stay the same, which is what our homeostatic mechanisms are. It's that self-organizing mechanism that we have, that the homeostatic mechanisms, and it's always trying to fight between staying the same or adapting. So adaptations that are always happening depends on the input that we get. And whether then that goes in a positive direction or a negative direction, well, it depends on a whole lot of factors within your system. For example, the state of your current body systems, your ability to even sense what's going on in your current system. I think the subluxation comes into that. The functional reserves that you have within your regulatory systems, including the nervous system, right? Your energy metabolism levels, a lot of other internal factors, a lot of other environmental factors. Also, again, your levels of stress, chemical, emotional, or structural. So there's a lot that comes into play, whether you're adapting in a positive or negative direction. I didn't want to just leave it in saying that, subluxation causes that, and when we adjust it, it causes the other thing. It's not that simple. There's a lot more that comes into play. But one thing that's very, very clear in all of this, in how the central nervous system controls spinal function, is that these small little intersegmental muscles play a very, very key role. And the key here is that they play a sensory role. So every time your spinal bones move, it's going to cause stretch of these little intersegmental muscles. And when they're stretched, that gets sent up to the brain. And it's quite amazing. You can actually record from them. You can hear the tut, 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 where it's firing away just in the background at the normal level. And then you might stretch one of them and it goes tut, 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 tut. And then you might slacken it off and it goes tut, tut, tut. So from all of these tut, tut, tuts, from all your muscles, from all over your body, that's how your brain knows what's going on, even when you close your eyes. And of course, none of us can actually see our spine anyway. So we rely heavily on the stretch of these little paraspinal muscles. This is just to show you, like, they are, the little stretch receptors themselves are wound around these little intrafusal fibers, and they're parallel to the actual extrafusal fibers that cause the contraction. And if you stretch that muscle, at all, it automatically, it's like a little gate opens as soon as you stretch it, and it will automatically fire to the brain. So if you stretch the muscle, it goes much, much faster. So you can't stretch a muscle without the signal going to the brain, basically. Another really cool thing that do we have a biologically plausible mechanism for how we even get subluxated? Well, yes, we actually do. This quote comes directly from a book written by David Butler and Lorimer Moseley in Australia. Very, very clever pain neurophysiologist or clinical neurophysiologist. And what they talk about is, like, literally what they've written in their book. It's called Pain, Explain Pain. They've written, however, if the long muscles are turned on, what they're talking about is stress at this stage and activating the sympathetic nervous system. So if the long muscles are turned on because of that stress signal, the shorter ones, for example, the stabilizing muscles between the vertebrae, they go to sleep because there's no need for them if you're trying to avoid danger. So what I take from that is stress or overload to the system, which is going to ready the body for fight and flight, is at the same time going to be putting the little muscles closest to your spine and skull to sleep. Now, if you're putting the little muscles closest to the spine and skull to sleep, it means your brain can't tell what's going on, which means the brain is now on autopilot when it comes to your spine. And it can, of course, guess wrong. And this is where you can then set up this central segmental motor control problem, where the brain isn't controlling the spinal motion segments in an ideal way because it doesn't know what's really going on. It's just having to guess because it's under this stress and pressure. So to me, this makes perfect sense. This is biologically plausible. It suits the whole neural plasticity model. And so something as simple as stress is probably why people are actually getting subluxated to begin with, or why you're getting these areas of the spine that aren't functioning in an ideal way. Another cool study that just very recently came out from Mike Schneider and his colleagues over in Pittsburgh in the States. It was a really, really cool study. I had to actually write to him and thank him for the paper. As soon as I saw it, I was like, wow, this is so cool. It's something we've been looking at, trying to measure intersegmental range of motion before, during, and after an adjustment. And they've done it. It was a phenomenal study. What they showed, and they did these biplane x-rays, so they did multiple x-rays. I think it was 160 per second or something, insane amount during the actual adjustment. And they've got before and after. And Mike sent me back these awesome videos. I should have put them in this talk, but I forgot, sorry. That actually shows the movement that they could show. They could literally show the movement patterns before and after the adjustment. They could also show from the study that the facet joints gap. And not just at one level, but at multiple levels. When you adjust the spine, the facet joints do gap a little bit. And after the adjustment, there is an increase an intersegmental range of motion at multiple levels. So again, that tells me, well, if you're increasing the range of motion, you're increasing the stretching of those little paraspinal muscles, which was the reason we were looking into it, because I needed to know if this was the case, and he's already shown it. So, all the evidence is pointing to, if you adjust the spine, you increase the range of motion intersegmentally, which means you stretch those little paraspinal muscles intersegmentally, which means you're changing the bombardation back up to the brain about what's going on at that level. And I think it's Joel Picard that's written about it, or his colleagues, where they said that this input, from those muscle spindle firing to the brain, it's probably a really novel input. It's something that you wouldn't normally be able to achieve by just normal motion. We have to go in there with the thrust to achieve it. And it's probably such a novel input to the brain that it sort of wakes up those little muscles that have gone to sleep. And because of that, then the brain becomes more aware of what's going on in the spine. And this seems to have this positive effect on not only spinal muscle control, but also the rest of the body. So what evidence do we have for that? Well, it's really cool. Because we started to look at this subclinical pain category, we ended up getting all these studies done where we were comparing people that fit this subclinical pain category and people that did not. So what the subclinical pain category means, or the definition of it, is that people have ongoing or history of ongoing, reoccurring pain, ache, or tension in their spine. So pain, ache, or tension that comes and goes, but it's not always present. They don't consider it a problem, so they haven't sought any treatment for it yet. And most importantly, on the day we're studying these guys, they're not in pain. The reason for that was that when I was in the early days when we started this work, what we were trying to understand is what happens neurophysiologically when we adjust to subluxation. So I couldn't have people in pain because I was measuring central nervous system function. People that are in pain alone changes central nervous system function. And if I changed pain sensation and there was changes in the brain, well, I couldn't argue that was because of the adjustment. It could have just been because there was a change in their pain levels. So I hope this makes sense. I literally had to remove the pain out of the question so that it's just, they were all pain-free. So on the time before the adjustment, they were subluxated. They had areas in the spine that wasn't moving properly. I would just normally check for intersegmental range of motion, tenderness to touch, the feel of the joint play and feel, I'd muscle test. I just do what I would normally do as a chiropractor in practice, and assessing the spine to determine where I would deem the subluxation to be and where I'd want to apply my thrusts. So we ended up with these, multiple studies using different measures, comparing people, because some people that came in, when we asked them, so have you ever had ache, pain, or tension reoccurring in your spine? And some of them would say, no. And we're like, what? That some people have never, ever, ever had any pain, ache, or tension in their spine, ever. And I was like absolutely shocked. So we then amended our study protocols and updated our ethics to be able to include these people that have never, ever, ever had any spinal problems as a healthy control group. So we still had the subclinical people that came in that do have recurring issues. We made sure on the day we were testing them, they were pain-free, but we could then compare them. We could compare the people that have never had a history of any problems and those that do. So the only difference, because they're all pain-free, the only difference was that this subclinical pain group had a history of reoccurring spinal ache, pain, or tension. And what we've shown is that history of having reoccurring spinal problems causes changes to the brain. Or we don't know it causes changes, but at least these people's brains are functioning differently than these people that have never had any spinal problems at all. So how are they functioning differently? The people with subclinical pain, they're less aware of where their elbow joint is in space. They're less aware of where their shoulder joint is, where their body movements compare to shoulder movements. These people are less accurately able to interpret sound and visual information at the same time. Get that one? So a history of spinal dysfunction, and you're less able to accurately interpret sound and visual information. You control movements of your arms for dart throwing differently. So, and I'm going to exaggerate dramatically here, but if you were in that subclinical pain category, your arm dart throwing would be all over the place. Whereas in the people that had no problems with the spine, you'd have this perfect, on axis dart throwing. The messages that the brain sends to the muscles of your neck, if you have a history of ongoing problems, is differently. When you do a flexion motion, it doesn't switch off when you get into full flexion. You fatigue faster. Your neck muscles fatigue faster. So these are all the kinds of changes that can happen if you've got this history of ongoing ache, pain, or tension. So to me, what this is telling me basically is spinal dysfunction, even mild spinal dysfunction, is causing a change in the way the brain is interpreting what's going on in your body and your environment. Even mental rotation changed. So being able to mentally rotate objects in space changed. So, and you're less aware of where your arm is and where your shoulder is. So you're less aware of what's going on in the body, not just the spine, but in your body. And you're less aware of what's going on out in the environment, your sound and visual information, being able to mentally rotate objects. And it's changing the way you control your body, not only your spine, which is kind of makes sense, but even the way the brain is controlling something like your arm movements, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because for you to be able to move your arms and legs, you need to move your arm and leg in relationship to your spine anyway, to your core. And if you're not aware of what's going on in your spine, well, then no wonder you don't know what's going on in how you're controlling your arm movements. Like, it makes logical sense, and it really fits the latest neuroscience. And then what evidence do we have for when we adjust the spine that we have this neuroplastic effect? Well, we have shitloads of evidence for that. And so much evidence that I won't cover it in this session, but I'll do it in over the next few live events, because there's just too much of it. What have we shown? We've shown changes in the way the brain interprets proprioceptive information. We've shown changes in the way the brain sends messages back out to muscles. We've shown changes where you get more efficient muscle contractions in your leg muscles. You get stronger in your leg muscles. This has been done in both healthy populations, elite athletes, chronic stroke patients. We know that the changes that happen after the proprioceptive changes that happen are involving the prefrontal cortex, which is a phenomenal part of the brain. So there's loads. Pelvic floor muscle function changes, jaw muscle function changes. So there's so many changes that I'll do several live events just to get through all of those as well. One thing you can quote me on though now is we finally do have a model for what that, functional lesion is, or that chiropractic subluxation, what it is, this central segmental motor control problem in neurophysiology terms. I wouldn't use that with the public, but if you're speaking to a scientist or another healthcare professional, that's the terms I'd use. And we do finally have a model for how our adjustments work, how our spinal adjustments work, that is supported by a significant body of research. And that's really, really important, because in our entire history, we've not had a plausible model. We've not had a biologically plausible model that was actually backed by research until now. Doesn't mean we have the whole story yet, but it means that we at least have something. For the first time, we have something. And I think that's really, really exciting. So what do we not yet know enough about? Everything. Everything. All the models. We don't know enough about any of them really yet, not even the neuroplasticity model. We need to do heaps more research. We've really only scratched the surface. And there's still so many other aspects to the subluxation yet that just haven't really been studied enough. Like there may still be, CSF flow changes, the cerebral spinal fluid flow changes. It might feed the brain differently. That might be involved. There might be fascial connections. There could be dural connections. The mechanoreceptors within the dura itself could be a part of this whole thing that, we just don't really know yet because we haven't been able to study it appropriately. There could be bone communication. I go talk to some of these physiologists at, these neuroscience conferences, and and this one guy was talking to me about, well, Heidi, bone's actually really an intelligent tissue, and bone actually can communicate with other bones. And I'm going, yeah, no, that doesn't surprise me at all. But, there's science has evolved so much. There could literally just be, mechanical bone to bone forces, and you can communicate throughout the entire body from that. So, the future is going to show so much more about what, this dysfunctional segment really is than we currently have. We still don't exactly know how we impact the parasympathetic nervous system. There seems to be some evidence that we change that vagal tone, that we actually help reduce the stress in the system, which again would make sense with this neuroplastic model by changing the brain's, fight and flight response to calming it down. This is probably also how it impacts organ function, not the squash nerve roots, but via the brain again. So, because if you switch on that vagal tone, you switch on the parasympathetic nervous system, you switch on healing, you switch on everything to do with organ healing. The better your brain is aware of what's going on in your body, including your organs, all the better it's going to function too. It's just that we haven't yet studied that very well, and we still need to do that. But it's probably a via the brain effect. There's still a lot more research that can be done about the biomechanical effects. The neural effects we still need to look into. How long do these changes last? There's so much we don't know about that. And what about all our different techniques? What if some of our techniques have more of an impact on certain mechanoreceptors versus others? We know the high velocity, low amplitude thrust has an effect on these muscle spindles. That's been documented quite well, and I'll go over that again in another one of these live events. But what about other, softer tissue techniques? What about our neuroemotional techniques, where we actually probably impact the brain and the stories that we, our own inner reality from a affective aspect. So there's so much more that we need to get at that we don't fully understand. And I just want to make that really, really clear. Another thing, and this is really key, we don't yet know if it matters whether you actually apply your thrust to that subluxated segment, or can we just randomly manipulate the spine? Should we just manipulate where it hurts? Or does it matter that we adjust these dysfunctional segments? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, we're actually looking into that at the college at the moment, because we don't even know if just a single adjustment can have these neural changes that we've seen. Because so far, in most of our studies, it's been me or some of the other chiropractors that I work with that have provided the chiropractic care, and we've taken a very pragmatic approach. We've adjusted anything that we could get at. Sometimes people are taped to a chair, so they can't move, and all I can actually get at is their neck. But I would have adjusted more than one level in their cervical and upper thoracic spine from a seated position. So I don't yet know if you'll have a neurophysiological effect from adjusting one single segment, and also what will happen if we thrust at a segment that we don't think is subluxated. So it's something that we're trying to look into now. We've got a group of bioengineers out from Denmark to keep it as, bias-free as possible. I still think you actually need to measure the input forces. But anyway, that's detail. But it's a really, really interesting question. So my point of this is there is so much we do not know. But in saying that, we at least have now, for the first time ever, one model that is biologically plausible and that is backed by research evidence. So if you are going to talk to the public, other healthcare professionals, anybody else, please talk to the neuroplasticity model. Because if you talk about the bones being out of place, squashing nerves, it's just the evidence does not support it. And it just makes us, laughable. If I am talking about the subluxation to the public or other healthcare professionals, I talk about the complexity. I talk about that spinal function is not straightforward. It's the spine needs to sometimes move, sometimes stiffen up. I give examples like running or lifting and make sense to people. I then start talking about those multiple layers of muscles that the deep little muscles need. That the brain needs to sense those to then be able to control all those multiple layers of muscles. I talk about that the brain also needs to control your breathing. It's coordinated in with spinal function, your pelvic floor muscles, your continence, your eyeball muscles. I give the example. I say, hey, you can read that, right? Well, you can read that even though your head's going from side to side. The reason you can read that is because the brain is sensing what's going on at those deep paraspinal muscles, and it's there communicating with your eyeball muscles to keep your eyeballs level. It's also communicating with those multiple layers of back muscles to get the spine moving when it should and stiffening up when it should. And at the same time, it's coordinating your breathing and your pelvic floor muscles. I then talk about, especially now that this study's been done, because it's so cool. I love you, Mike. That, when you've adjusted the spine, we know that there's gapping at the facet joints. We know that there's increased range of motion at multiple segments. And that increase in motion means that we're stretching those little muscles even more, and that this signal is probably a really unique signal that goes back up to the brain, which makes it therefore more accurately able to perceive what's going on in the body and the world around you. And that this is all controlled by the brain, that the way the brain is sensing what's going on and the way that the brain is controlling spinal movement plus everything else. because the brain is also the one that senses everything else that's going on in the world around you. I then go on to say that we've done many studies showing that people, even with mild spinal dysfunction, that their brains are also dysfunctioning, that they're not as aware of where their arms and legs are in space, that they're not as aware of where their shoulder joint is in space. They're not even as aware of their spinal, where their actual spine is in space. It doesn't control spinal motion function as well. But more importantly, it doesn't control arm function that well. And, I even talk about the fact that mild spinal dysfunction even causes trouble in the way you see and hear things. I just think that's mind-boggling. And the way you can mentally rotate tasks in your visual field, so therefore it can interfere with how you can interpret your environment. And some people might say, well, why is this important? Who cares? And therefore I think it's really, really important to give them a little analogy. The analogy that I give them after I've done that spiel, which only took me, 30 seconds to really sort of, rattle out. And obviously I could take a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on the audience and the opportunity. If I was in a lift, I wouldn't have a lot of time. But then I give them the analogy, because they might go, well, who cares? What's exciting about that? And I say, well, imagine you're driving a car at 100 miles per hour or 100 kilometers per hour, depending on where you are. Imagine you're driving that car 100 k's an hour. Do you think it might be important to you that your brain knows accurately what's going on in your arms and legs without you having to look at them? Yeah. Do you think it's important for your brain to accurately and as fast as possible interpret your sound and visual information? You're driving 100 k's per hour. It's going to be very important that your brain accurately interprets sound and visual information. It's going to be extremely important that your brain interprets, can mentally rotate objects as fast as possible to interpret what's in front of you. And this is where it becomes more real for people. If they're not adults or they're mums and they've got kids, you can very easily turn this into a kid analogy as well. Just go, imagine a child, or if you're talking to someone with a kid, just go, imagine, your child. Do you think it matters to them going through schooling, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their accomplishments, if they can actually kick the ball, if they can actually catch a ball? You have to know where your arms and legs are to be able to kick and catch a ball. You need to be able to coordinate your eyeball muscles to be able to read properly. It would have a huge impact. These little minor things will have a huge impact on how a child feels about themselves and can accomplish things at school. If they're aware accurately where their arms and legs are, where their shoulder muscles are, if they can move their muscles appropriately, if they can interpret sound and visual information, if they can mentally rotate objects and identify objects, on the whiteboard or out in the field or even, that it is a ball coming at them and things like that, it would have a huge impact. Does that mean we know this for sure yet? Have we shown studies where chiropractic care reduces car accidents? Absolutely not. We don't know that yet. But it's what it implies. So it's something that we should study. But I want to make sure that you don't go claiming that we can reduce accidents. We don't know that yet, but it's what it implies. So if you're trying to translate this information into why does it matter, you can give these examples, but we don't know that for sure yet. It's one of my dream studies. We're trying to raise money through the Kids Summit that's coming up soon in Chicago, because I want to run these studies where we're looking at these prefrontal cortex functional changes in children in particular, because all the research we've done implies that we would help children, that they would be able to function better, be able to do their schoolwork better, because that's what prefrontal cortex function is. But yet we haven't studied the prefrontal cortex functional outcomes yet. We've shown changes in prefrontal cortex processing, but not that is turning into functional outcomes. It's one of those studies that I'm really keen to do. So I wouldn't go claiming those things yet, but it's what it implies that the effects of our care would have. I hope you get the distinction. It's really quite an important one. So my vision really is, and one of the things that gets me up out of bed all days, every day, is that I think chiropractic care should be available for everybody. Affordable, great chiropractic care should be available for everybody. And I think one of the reasons that it's not yet still is that we have this stigma that we are a little bit alternative, which is cool and fine. But I think sharing the facts is going to make a big difference to how people get access to chiropractic care. I think if the medical profession and the public see good quality research coming out, they can see a plausible mechanism. They can go, I didn't realize that chiropractic care has this neuroplastic effect, makes the brain more able to interpret what's going on in the body and the world around it, hey, I think it's probably worth giving it a go for this, that, and the other thing, even though we haven't studied this, that, and the other thing just yet too. So that's the kind of thing that drives me. I hope that before, within my lifetime, before I die, that people will actually be referred to chiropractors first before drugs and surgery. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with drugs and surgery. I just hope that before we have to go to those drastic measures, that we first try something as conservative and as safe and as nice as chiropractic care, that we clear up that communication between the brain and the body and the environment so that the brain can accurately interpret what's going on and therefore control the whole system better, and that we might not have to have the drugs and surgery in many of these cases. And another thing that really drives me is I used to get this question in practice a lot. I used to see a lot of parents and families, and these parents would come in sometimes with tears because they just can't believe the changes in their children. And they'd ask me, why is chiropractic care not available for all children, all babies, and as they grow up? And I can't answer that. To me, it's shocking, and it should be available to all children as they grow up. Should be part of, the thing that society provides for them. And that's one of the things that drives me again. It's why I want to do these pediatric studies or these studies in children and in babies. So anyway, that's what drives me. I think the time is right, and right now. If you try noticing now when you go past a magazine stand or a bookshop, and you'll see brains everywhere. So it's like a brain era, and it's everywhere. And it's funny, once I started to notice this because, I was finding all these brain changes. It's like the brains are freaking everywhere. So right now, I think is a really good time. It's like we're sitting on a gold mine. We actually have something that we've documented evidence shows that we impact the brain, that we can help the brain function better. I know that's only, so far in certain little areas, but that's huge. I mean, even if you look at something as simple as pain is created in the brain. I'll do a live event just on pain. It's created in the brain. And so the way you can turn on and off pain is also in the brain. And prefrontal cortex, again, that we've shown that we change the processing of, is very, very heavily involved in where pain becomes chronic, where you actually, sense pain. So it's like, even if you're just talking pain, I could show you a review article where it's talking about, is neuroplasticity the missing link to understanding chronic musculoskeletal disorders? It's all about neuroplasticity. It's all about the brain. So to me, we're sitting on a gold mine, but we need to change our story. We can't be talking about squashed nerves. We really need to be talking about, we have a neuroplastic effect on the brain. What is neuroplasticity? It's just that the brain's always adapting, and it can adapt in a good way for us and we can function better, or it can adapt in a bad way if we're very overloaded and stressed. And so, when you've ended up in all these symptoms, it's because your system's been overloaded and it's adapted in that negative way. And what we want to try and do now is improve that plasticity by adjusting your spine. It seems to help the way the brain perceives what's going on in the body and the world around you, and the whole system functions better. And that can be why it doesn't necessarily matter what level we're actually adjusting you at, because we're actually trying to improve the function of the spine. Although me saying that I'm saying that as a chiropractor because we haven't shown that yet. It's why we're doing these studies. Does it even matter if we, apply our forces or our adjustments to the subluxated segment? And that's why we have to answer that question. But to me, the time is right now. So my challenge to you is learn your science. We've made it so easy for you now. I know, whether you're a member or not, I don't even know if you're using the material to the degree that you can. But that's what this is about. If you're not a member and you're listening and you're wanting to become a member, you can join as a special now on for today at the realitycheck.com/event. So it's a little bit cheaper than what the full price is. But we've made it so simple for you now to learn your science. So what we've done, actually, I'll come back to this book thing a little bit later on. What we do in Haavik Research is we take all the hard work out of searching the literature and evaluating the literature and then translating it into easy to understand language. So we'll search, we won't just, read one paper. We'll look at all the papers we can find on a particular topic, and then we'll evaluate that literature. Some studies are really good, some studies are not so good. So we do all the evaluation for you as well. Then we summarize it for you and we translate it for you. How can you talk about it to the public? If you're talking to the public or other healthcare professionals, you really, this is just gold. If you can talk about the facts, if you can keep it really factual, really simple, you can still go into your own, clinical theories afterwards, but you can at least share the facts. And I think the facts will get people in the door. I really, really believe that. I think that just to give you an idea too, like we've been going now for about 18 months with this membership, and we've got so many topics that we've covered already. So all of these topics, we've already done little reviews on. I think there's 28 summaries on research articles or on research topics that we've done. And so topics, for example, what is the evidence about chiropractic care in babies with colic or bedwetting or older adults or falls risk or low back pain or neck pain or headaches, or how reliable are the subluxation indicators, or what about the opioid crisis, or how does chiropractic care change cerebellum function, or what is spinal function and how does spinal dysfunction impact brain function? What about the safety literature? What about the stroke literature? What about pregnancy? What about sports performance? What about injury prevention? What about the somatovisceral dysfunction? What is the evidence so far? And what happens with joint cavitation? Does that sound, does a cracking sound, does it even matter? How cost effective is chiropractic care? What about the cardiovascular effects, the range of motion and the posture, and so on? So these are all topics that we've covered, and they're about 10-minute reviews for you. We've called them science gems, because we're getting all the gems out of all the grey stones out there for you, meaning that we've summarized everything we can find, and then we're picking out the good ones, the ones that are the studies that are decent, done properly, not just because they give the right results. That doesn't mean it's good or not, but the good literature, whether it's positive or negative, we evaluate the studies for you, and then we share what does this evidence tell us. So in some of these topics that I've got listed here, you can't really claim anything because we don't have any evidence. And that's the interesting thing. But for some of them, we can claim things, and we make that very clear for you. Another thing I wanted to share with you right now is my book has now been translated into multiple languages. So the book is available now in French, in German, in English, and in Spanish. It's also available in Italian. Actually, it says coming soon here, but I actually have the link for that. So if you want the book in Italian, let me know and I can send you out the link. But these books now, including the English version, are available from Europe. So if you're in Europe, we do have these books in our European distribution center in Germany, so that the postage is cheaper, and of course you'll get it quicker. We also, in that European distribution center, have German, French, Spanish, and English pamphlets, so on the effects of the adjustment. But if you want Scandinavian languages, we also obviously have English and Portuguese. We still have them in New Zealand. So then you need to go HeidiHaavik.com as opposed to HeidiHaavik.eu. Back to the membership site again. I wanted to talk a little bit now about what you can use the membership different pieces for. It's another thing that came through when we surveyed you guys, you members, that you wanted a little bit more help with how can you use the resources. So I'll spend 5 minutes on that now, and then I really want to get to questions and answers, and we'll have to see if the technology will work on that one. But what you do get from the Haavik Research membership, which you can join at that www.therealitycheck.com/event. I think we can put up a post on that, can't we, Kelly? Yeah, cool. So if you want to join, if you're not a member, what you can get available, and for you members, what you have got available to you, if you go to therealitycheck.com, you've used your email address and then you've set up a password, then you just log on to the site. Then everything is there for you. So we've got a science mastery section, and that's where you find those reviews. We call them science gems. We've also got some full webinars there, and now we'll put the live events there as well. So if you wanted to, for example, what our members, or some of our members, are using these reviews for, some members are joining just for this information. So they just want to know, what does the evidence say on all these things? Not just what evidence is there, but how do you interpret it? What's good, what's not, and how can you talk about it? So some members are just using that information. Some members are using it to upskill their staff. So each month they'll have like a staff upskill session, or, team update, professional development for their CAs, and for, if they work with other health professionals, and they literally go through one of these science gems. It's only about 10 minutes long. We've also got some worksheets that you can work through if you like, specifically for some of these topics. So for example, if you've got a CA and she has to answer questions, well, how would she answer questions by being truthful to the facts? There's some very straightforward ways that you can do that. And that's what a lot of our members are using these science gems for. And it's just a resource library there other members are using those science gems to refer to if they're going to give talks on topic. You know, if they're going to have a meeting with a medical doctor. We've got associations that are members specifically just get to access that information, so that if they're giving a talk or they're lobbying the government on a certain topic, they know the facts and they know how to translate that, because we've done that for you. And we're obviously PhD scientists that have done that. So we haven't got communication specialists in to help with the science gems. It's just from us. And we're trying to translate it for you so that you could talk to other medical doctors or the public on the topic. You've also got the little whiteboard animations, the hand-drawn whiteboard animations. They're shorter. So they're like 3 to 6 minutes long, and they are for the public. So if you want to know what language to use for the public when talking about various bits to do with, you know, chiropractic care, the subluxation, the effects of an adjustment, cavitation, whatever. Again, I think we've got 30 of those little public animations, the little hand-drawn whiteboard animations on multiple topics. So again, there's many, many ways you can use this information. You can use this on your website. So all of these different animations, it doesn't even need to be a seen website. It can be like a hidden website that you have all these animations on, and you can send the links out to your entire database, depending on what country you're in. You've got to be careful. Some places you need to have permission before you send anything, but they're not sales. They're literally purely information, but it's still just check with your own local legislation what you're allowed to do. If you have permission from your members, that's another thing you can do. If you can't, just email all your membership one by one. You can just, as you get new members, or you can contact your clients and ask permission to send pure information just on the effects of the adjustment, why it works, how it works, but from a scientific aspect. So now the animations, they are made with communication specialists. So we've got us scientists arguing with a communication specialist about, you know, what can we say, because we don't want to say anything that's not truthful to the science. And as the beauty of it too is that as the science changes, we can update these animations as well. Another way our members are using these animations is they've downloaded the full waiting room. So they just play them one by one. They just sort of roll over one by one, all 30 on a screen in their waiting room. Some have even told me they put the screen out to foot traffic because we have subtitles on it. So you don't have to listen to it in the waiting room. And then with the subtitles, you can actually follow the animations, and they're quite catchy. That's the cool thing about them. People are actually drawn to them. So some people use them out to the walking traffic. A lot of people use them as a waiting room video. Some people play them certain videos at certain times, and then they bring in the pamphlets and give them a little bit more information. Another thing that we've got available for you is we've prepared some talks. I actually recently gave a talk to healthcare professionals in Hawke's Bay in New Zealand. There was a local chiropractic group there that invited me down. I gave a talk to them first, and then I gave a talk to the local healthcare professionals. So I will turn that one into with a script for the membership. We've already got about 3 talks there, again on different topics. You know, how would we talk about chiropractic care for kids? How would we talk about the effects of the adjustment? We provide you with a whole PowerPoint talk, the script fully referenced so that you know what I'm claiming, when and how, and what references go with it. We've also got a whole social media section for you. So if you want to increase your visibility in your local community, you can use the social media content to get information out. So there we have quotes, reference quotes. You can just go into there and like set up a whole month's worth of social media benefits just flying out the door for the next month. So you can do it in one whole setting. You can set particular themes. So you can just do about kids, you can do about older adults, and get that out then. You also have a heavy discount on our online shop. So for posters and pamphlets and stuff like that, you get a really big discount. So it's worth using that if you're a member. Obviously, I can't tell you now because there's non-members here. You get a discount code to use. So I think that's it for me. I'm really keen on questions and answers now. Please take me up on this offer. If you're not a member, join us. It's only $60 US a month. If you've got to practice with 2 or more people, it's $120 a month. You can also pay for a full year and get 2 months free. That's totally up to you. Do we have any questions, Kelly? And how do I know about that? Can you see them and just tell me?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll start with some questions. Can you read them for me?
Can you train your feed-forward anticipatory brain function?
So the question is, can you train your feed-forward anticipatory brain functions? Yes, you can. A lot of the physiotherapy research is literally looking at, can you retrain that? And that's there's a whole body of research on that out there, which is really interesting. But what's also kind of cool is that Bernadette Murphy and Paul Marshall did this study. This was part of, this was way back, 2006, they published the paper, looking at the effects of a single adjustment session on that feed-forward activation of the core muscles when you lift your arms up. And they showed an almost 40%, I think it was 38.8% improvement in being able to feed-forward activate your core muscles as, before you lift your arm up. So it was an almost 40% improvement just from a single adjustment. Of course, we don't know how long does that last. Maybe they need to get repeat adjustments. But this ability to switch on your core muscles is actually really, really key to being able to protect your spine. And there's another guy, Kolowicki, I don't know quite how to say his name, but Kolowicki, incredible study, 2005, I believe. No, 15. Anyway, I can get that out to you. He did this study on 303 college students, and he measured their ability to switch on and on or off those core muscles appropriately. And he predicted, based on their ability of these 330 healthy college students, well, seemingly healthy college students, he predicted which students would end up having a low back injury later that same year. Really interesting. So based on that, so there's this big debate in the literature now amongst neuroscientists, are these, dysfunctional nervous system processes, I call them the straws on the camel's back, such as this inability to switch on your core muscles, is that causing low back pain and low back injury? And there's arguments about that. Obviously, Kolowicki and his group are arguing for that is one of the reasons that you actually end up with low back injuries and low back pain. But some will say that, well, you actually had an injury or you got pain, and that's what switched off this ability to feed forward activate to begin with. So there's arguments about that, but there's no argument in the literature about if you have these dysfunctions there, and I'll cover these dysfunctions in another live event anyway, but because that feed forward activation is one of them. But if you have these dysfunctional nervous system processes, like not being able to feed forward activate your core abdominal muscles when you lift an arm up, if you have those kinds of things, and there's others, there's no doubt that that's why you get reoccurring problems and why it becomes chronic. So it's really important that we look at, can we improve those? So that study by Bernadette Murphy and Paul Marshall is just gold, because it shows that an adjustment can improve your ability to switch on those protective mechanisms. So, and again, I'll cover that to much greater degree, but at least I hope you've got it quite clear that yes, you can retrain it. Any other questions, Kelly?
You talked at the beginning about functional reserve contributing to maladaptation. What would be an example of that?
Okay, functional reserves and how that could contribute. Literally, if the body is exhausted, it can run out of its own functional reserves. Like it's less able to produce literally energy. I mean, one of the things in burnout that I personally know an awful lot about, far too much about actually, is that you literally just get drained of your energy reserves. You're constantly on that fight and flight, and you literally do not have that capacity to use your energy on the healing processes. So I don't quite know if I'm actually answering that question very well. I might not be. Might have to get back to that one.
Does the adjustment always have to be manual with a crack in the studies, even in children?
So does the adjustment always have to be a manual adjustment and have a crack? And, what about in kids? Obviously not. But what I'm talking about with the adjustment, with the research studies that we've done, is that they have all been high velocity, low amplitude thrusts, and obviously in adults. And so when you have that in adults, we're affecting the muscle spindle input. Now, I've also taken care of kids and babies, and I do not do manual adjustments, certainly not in newborns, right? It's really just, gentle touch, eyeball pressure type thing. And that still has an impact. I don't think that impact is via the muscle spindles per se. It could be via other mechanoreceptors, and maybe because, babies are just so young, it has a slightly different effect on them. Shows you why we need to do so much more research on this topic as well, because we don't really know. But so can you have an adjust from just, the light force? Yes, but I think it acts via different mechanoreceptors. So the high velocity manual thrust, when you get the cavitation, we know that that effect goes via the muscle spindles for sure. It also impacts, when you thrust, you impact pretty much everything. There's a blast of, cutaneous input. If you're moving the head and neck around, it's vestibular input. It's probably, fascia that we're stretching muscles, we're squashing all those other mechanoreceptors that are, pressure sensitive. So, raphidial corpuscles and God knows what else. So when you actually thrust in a high velocity with a cavitation, you blast, all these mechanoreceptors. But ongoing, because we know we change the range of motion intersegmentally, on an ongoing effect, in addition to the blast from the thrust, you will have the different input from the mechanoreceptors around the spine. Now, when it comes to babies and say low force techniques, you'll still have, pressure sensitive changes while you're actually touching the squashing the skin. If you move the head around, you can have slower mobilizations. And in the slower mobilizations, I think you're affecting the Golgi tendons because you're stretching muscles, which activates Golgi tendons more. So I just think that the different types of adjustments will have an effect on the different types of mechanoreceptors that are in the tissues that you're actually working on. So I hope that answers that one.
Does the neuroplasticity model of subluxation explain what is happening with adjustments that are not high velocity, such as SOT?
So the question now is, does the neuroplasticity model also explain what's happening with like low force techniques? And I kind of really answered that already, haven't I? Because it does. It's just that it's not necessarily going via the muscle spindles. So with blocking, with other kinds of input to the spine, if it's not the high velocity low amplitude thrusts, you're still changing mechanoreceptive input around the spine. And I still think, and again, I've had some phenomenal SOT work done on me, and you definitely change that whole spinal function. And if you're changing the whole spinal function, you are changing the afferent input going back up to the brain. Have we actually looked at SOT specifically in any of our studies? No, we haven't. And that's something that I really would like to do. One of the other things that we're looking at doing moving forward now is looking at the different techniques. I call it the guru study, where we can actually start looking at the different techniques and are they also having the same sort of input and in the same areas of the brain, because we could do that now. But then, of course, I want the gurus, I want the actual experts in SOT, or I want the experts in neuroemotional technique, and I want the experts in all these different techniques, and we can see what are they affecting. What about in babies? We could even do it in babies and have just low force techniques. It gets a little bit tricky with ethics and things like that, but it's certainly doable where there's no high velocity. Actually, I'm even talking to this one guy that does these, the balloon adjustments up the nose. Unbelievable. I've had it done, but of course there's no. I mean, it's a high velocity, but it's a cranial movement. You know what I mean? If anything, so I still want to do. We're talking now, trying to fundraise for doing that. The effects of that. What about the balloon adjustment of? What about normal cranial adjustments? Again, with SOT, you can do some phenomenal cranial work. And how is that affecting the brain? The neuroplasticity model fits all of these, but it's just maybe not the muscle spindle impact. Do you know what I mean? Like it might be dural attachments, or it might be some other way, but we could at least test and see if we're having a neuroplastic effect. And my guess is that we will be, but it just might be working via different mechanoreceptors to begin with. Next question.
What neuroscience journals would you recommend to read on a regular basis?
What neuroscience? Well, it depends how much of a neuroscience nerd. What neuroscience journals do I recommend reading on a regular basis? Depends how much of a neuroscience nerd you are. I read a lot of neuroscience journals. There's Frontiers of Neuroscience I really love. Experimental Brain Research, Clinical Neurophysiology I really love. I love there's just so many of them. There's some that are almost more, for public consumption, like Nature Neuroscience. There's some really good ones in that way. Depends how much of a nerd you are.
Geek level, big nerd.
Okay, you're a real geek? Yeah, well, then I would go with those ones. Or email me again, or send through your email address, and I will email you out a list of some really good neuroscience journals that, yeah. It's lovely we've got a geek here. Fabulous. Bring on the geeks. Next question.
I think that's it for now.
Oh my God, I think that's that for now. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask? I think, there's a button I can tick here. I'm just going to get my cursor back. Okay, I think you now have the option to speak. Did that show up on anybody's? Obviously, you don't have to speak if you don't want to speak. We've done quite well. It's about an hour and a half. I was hoping to keep it under 2 hours. So if there's no more final questions, I'll give you a few minutes to type away. Any other feedback you can come with too. And if there's anything that we can help you with, you members, let me know. One thing that I wanted to say, if there's members here, some of our members in our survey said that they weren't hearing from us. If you are not getting at least a couple of emails a month from us, then our emails are going into your junk mail. So if that's you, please just message through to us or go through the website, the contact me, or my email address is heidi@haavik.com. And just let me know if you're not getting your emails, because then I can just get you in touch with our, technological whiz that's right here, Kelly Boyd, and she'll sort that out for you in no time, because you should be hearing from us on a regular basis.
And Natalie wants to know if you'll talk about negative reviews or research.
Yeah, I'll absolutely talk about negative reviews and research. In our entire membership, when we go through stuff, we share with you what the research says, whether it's a positive outcome for chiropractic or a negative outcome for chiropractic. But what's most important to me is how good is the study? If the study is really good and it has a negative outcome, I will tell you that, because that's the whole point. The facts are the facts. The research results are not necessarily what we want them to be. They just are what they are. I mean, it's one of the reasons that I've ended up, now talking about the brain. I wasn't looking for the brain. The brain showed itself to us through the research studies. And it's like, wow, we have this central effect and it's affecting the cortex. I didn't know that. That's where the research results take us. And there's some things that we get negative results where it shows up that it doesn't work that way. We thought it might, but it didn't. Like one of the studies we did with pelvic floor function, we thought we're going to get an increase in the squeezing strength and an increase in the being able to open up that levator hiatus muscle in the pregnant women, but we didn't. We didn't show any changes in that. The only change we got was at rest, the muscle hole opened up, which again, that changes the story. So, absolutely, I will tell you black and white exactly what the research results are whenever I cover any topic, for sure. And that's what we've done through the membership too. I think that's it. It's been really wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed it. Do send us your feedback, even if you write to info@haavik.com, and I'll keep up these live events, and we'll always keep a room for a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any problems with anything, with any of the membership resources, or accessing something, or knowing how to do something, if you want some more technical support, Kelly will also be here for these live events. She is here now. She's got a bit of a cold, so she didn't want to actually talk. But she is here if you've got any technical questions with how do I embed the videos or anything like that. And even if they're silly questions or you think they're silly, they're not silly to us. Please just ask us, and we're here to help you. So it's been really wonderful. Oh, we've got one more, final one.
Specificity of adjustment has a role on neuroplastic model that you explain.
So the question is, does specificity matter when it comes to the neuroplasticity model? Now, I think in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. What I think is that you don't need to adjust. Like, one thing that the neuroplasticity model tells me is that you don't need to adjust T4 to affect that nerve root that goes to the heart. Are you with me? Like, we're not relieving pressure off the nerve root. The actual neuroplasticity story is bigger than that. We have an effect on the brain. So does specificity matter? I don't think you need to be, so recipe driven that, we need to affect this part of the spine because it affects the sympathetic nervous system versus the parasympathetic nervous system, or we need to adjust that level because it affects the diaphragm, or this level because it adjusts the heart. That, I think, is bullshit. But the operative word here is think. But, the question is, does specificity matter? My suspicion is, yes, it does, in that the subluxated segment matters. But that's exactly why I'm doing the study I'm doing right now. Does one, what does it matter if we adjust the subluxated segment? I actually think that that's what matters, but I don't know, and that's why I'm doing the study. And the reason for that is, what if it doesn't matter? Like another reason I'm doing that is, like, some people do studies where they say only adjust the low back because the low back is hurting. But what if it's an upper cervical subluxation that's causing a complete disruption between the way the brain is interpreting what's going on in the spine and the back, including the low back, And it's the upper cervical subluxation that's causing this disruption in the maladaptive processing, so that the brain isn't switching on and off core muscles appropriately, and it's not controlling the low back spinal musculature appropriately because of the upper cervical adjustment. And so that's where specificity, to me, does matter. If all I did then was manipulate the low back because that's where they hurt, is that enough? I don't know. I can't answer that question yet. I suspect it matters that you adjust where the dysfunction is, where the specificity there really does matter. And I think that the art and the skill of chiropractic is extremely important. So that the actual, art of the adjustment and knowing where to adjust and when to adjust and where not to adjust, I think that's important. But again, the operative word is think. And the reason I'm doing this research study right now is to put that theory to the test. So anyway, I'm now getting even more Facebook messages, which next time I'll have to turn off. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you guys have too. Do send me feedback, and I'll see you in about 2 or 3 months' time. Bye.